When I was sidelined, I was not looked at, I was spoken down to. Who were educated at that time were leaving India and going to the US or other countries. That was a real eye opener, I think, for me. I think young was a big negative word being in healthcare.
Where the stories breathe between old walls and moving crowds. In the narrow lanes of Mumbai, a city which never whispers but only lives. We often talk about growth, scale, and valuation in a typical profit led economy. But there is another economy which is quietly shaping the future, and that is the purpose economy. It is where businesses don't just generate profit, but also take responsibility. It is where success isn't measured in numbers, but in lives impacted. So that's why today we'll talk less about healthcare as systems and more about how care can be used as a driving force to run these systems. And for this, we have none other than Ameera Shah with us. Thank you, Ameera, for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, to begin with, I really want to ask this that you were born here in Mumbai, the city of dreams, and along with doctor parents of yours, your father is a pathologist and your mother is a gynac. Did you ever think of becoming a doctor when you were young? Or were you always sure that you want to get into the entrepreneur space?
Not at all. I mean, when I was very young, when I was, the age of 9 and 10 and 11, I remember every summer I used to go to my father's lab, which was called Dr. Sushil Shah's lab at the time. It was a single lab. It was about 1,800 square feet. There were about 20, 30 employees. Those are some of the best memories I have because I think it was, even though I grew up with parents talking about medicine at home all the time and I was comfortable with the lingo, but I could actually see the impact that we were making on people's lives and how mixing up a sample would change somebody's life. How not having a report ready in time would change somebody's course of treatment. So, seeing that in real time actually made a big difference in understanding the responsibility that came with being in healthcare.
Right.
So, I think for me, growing up, I actually never had a thought about doctor or entrepreneur. I was very clear about one thing. I had 2 times in my life where, even though I worked in the lab, when my own blood came out and I fainted, and even though I wanted to be a veterinarian at a point because I love animals, I was pretty sure that I did not have the strong heart to really look at blood and gore and be okay with it. I think my emotions would have overwhelmed me. So I was not going to become a doctor. And I think, entrepreneurship came at a time when I worked with a couple of startups in the US. And I really found that I enjoyed being one of few who made an impact in a small organization rather than being one of many in a very large setup organization. And that's how I decided to pursue the entrepreneurship.
And this brings me to my next question. So, while you were growing up, you studied abroad, like you mentioned, and you went to the Harvard Business School, and then you also happened to work with Goldman Sachs in New York. And then you take this bold decision of coming back to India and starting everything from scratch. So, what made you take that decision? Was there an instance in your life which pushed you to maybe come back and start everything from scratch?
I'll answer that, but just before that, you mentioned 2 names, and those 2 names were important for me. But what was more important for me was the university I went to, which is University of Texas at Austin. And even though it's not as big a name as Harvard Business School, it probably had a far bigger impact on my life. Because that was the place where I got to, it was a state university. So I got to see people of all backgrounds, all income groups. It was such a large school that you met all kinds of people of diversity. And I think to move from coming from, and not that I came from a rich family in India, I came from an upper middle class family. But I was still privileged compared to the rest of the country. But to go to the US and meet people from all kinds of backgrounds, people who came from families who couldn't afford to eat, people who couldn't afford to have an education, and they were somehow on scholarship there. That was a real eye opener, I think, for me. And more than Goldman, when I learned I didn't want to do that, there were a couple of startups that told me what I wanted to do. So it's very interesting how sometimes the typical path of the big names is not necessarily always the path for everybody. But I came back to India, honestly, because I felt a lot of patriotism. And I think I felt like I could do something for my country. I felt like all the people who were educated at that time were leaving India and going to the US or other countries. And I felt like I had been so blessed to have an education that I wanted to bring it back and try to do something with it. And that's how I came back in 2001.
And now that you were in India and you were starting off really young, were there certain challenges that you faced? For instance, felt like you're being sidelined or you're being treated as a typical young entrepreneur in the business space.
I mean, of course. I mean, honestly, at that point of time, more than a typical entrepreneur, I think young was a big negative word being in healthcare. You're 21 and everybody else is 60. I mean, they look at you like you're a bacha, which you kind of are, but you don't necessarily get any respect there. Also, that you're female. That also played a role. This was 2001. I mean, not that everything is great today, but it is better today. But in 2001, a young girl at 21 meant that she worked for 2, 3 years somewhere and then she got married at 24, 25. And that was the expectation of me from people around me, not from my parents. So, yeah, I mean, very often I was sidelined, I was not looked at, I was spoken down to. There were a lot of people who were condescending. But, for me, these were not moments of demotivation, right? These were moments actually of just saying, look, I got to do what I got to do. I got to achieve my outcome. Now, if these people choose not to respect me or choose to sideline me, why should I waste a single minute of my energy thinking about them? Let me still go do what I have to do. And I will find knowledge or find things that I can bring to the table that will earn that respect, which it did in time. You just have to be patient.
And since you started off really young, based on your experiences and this kind of skills that you have learned, do you have a certain approach when it comes to dealing with the younger generation that is working with you? A lot is being written about Gen Zs. This is a generation which prioritizes mental health. It's a generation which normalizes working in a healthy environment. They also are trying to normalize switching jobs. So, do you have a certain approach when it comes to dealing with the younger lot?
I can't say it's a different approach dealing with the younger lot versus everybody else because I'm the same person.
Yes.
So I can't really say that I'm, different with this one and that one. I think for me, I'm different based on the situation, based on what's needed by that person at that time. Now, that could be a 60-year-old person or that could be a 20-year-old person. But I try to give that person what they need at that point of time. Honestly, I'm very happy that this generation is caring for mental health. And I'm very happy that they don't want people to take them for granted. And I'm very happy that there is self-care and self-respect. In fact, one of the biggest things when in the last 25 years as I've worked, I've often seen employees take themselves for granted, not prioritize their families, not prioritize their mental health, not prioritize their self-care. And frankly, some people may think, oh, that's good for the organization क्योंकि उनको बहुत hard work कराते हैं, रगाड़ते हैं. But I don't see it that way. I think if you're not a healthy individual, you can't be a healthy employee. So if you are balanced in your life, you will probably bring that balance to work. If you are frustrated in your life where you're not giving time to family and every morning your mother and your wife and your kids and whoever are complaining to you, spend no time with us, how are you going to perform at work?
Right.
So I'm happy about this, frankly.
And talking about healthcare, I feel like healthcare is an industry which is directly related to purpose economy because it deals with people's emotions on a daily basis. So while you build a brand like Metropolis, how do you keep the aspect of empathy intact?
It's a tough one. And I think the only way to keep it intact is to lead from the front. People have to see you responding with empathy. People have to see you continuing to play that role as a leader. Also, it means that when you're seeing something happening a different way, you correct it. If systems are going a wrong way, you pull it back. Then it's also about training, right? It's about making sure that that continues as a very strong value in the culture. So, for example, when I'm talking to my HR head, am I only talking about attrition and I'm only talking about performance scores, or am I also talking about, hey, how are we gauging the culture? Are we spreading the culture far and wide? Is it going to the bottom of the pyramid? So I think it depends on how importantly the leader takes to it, number one. And then it all sort of flows from there. I see organizations today in healthcare which have both. You see some organizations which really focus on empathy, on quality, on accuracy, but you equally see organizations who are so profit focused, right? And the focus on any of those things is very much. So you have both, and everybody can survive and everybody can thrive.
And this, because you mentioned about individual leadership, do you think it's important for us to maybe prioritize, like you mentioned, individual leadership, then maybe promoting systems? How do you make a contrast there? Like how important it is for system-led spaces to come into the front picture, individual leadership?
I mean, honestly, you can't do without either. Both go hand in hand, right? Because you need, even with a very strong individual leadership, as you scale, that's not enough. You can do that when you're a banya shop or one single clinic or one single hospital. And individual leadership, strong leadership can drive it. But the minute you start scaling, if you don't have systems, if you don't have processes, you'll never be able to pass that down the line. So, in my mind, they have to go together. You have to be able to translate your skill of being a really good individual leader to how do you systemize it for all employees across? And how do you put the processes, how do you use technology, how do you spread the culture to do all of that to happen? So can't do without either.
And I also want to talk a little bit about your roles. You've been doing so much already. You are an entrepreneur. You are going out, giving interviews. You're constantly hustling. And at the same time, you've just entered in the space of your life where you're embracing motherhood. So how are you able to navigate so many roles at the same time?
Besides continuing to lead Metropolis and being an entrepreneur, I'm also doing, 2, 3 other things. I'm also the president for Nat Health, which is the organization, the federation, which represents all private healthcare in India. So we work very closely with the government to change policy for healthcare across the country. I also am building a foundation for women in the workforce and women entrepreneurship, which also takes a fair amount of my time. The reason I mention this is because I feel as women, if we have support, which we all need, but it comes in different forms. We all have the ability to do multiple things at one time, which I can categorically say when I look at men, honestly, that ability is limited.
Right.
Right? We truly have an innate ability to do it. I can attend meetings where I'm talking about 1,000 crore deals and be thinking about my son's lunch at the same time, in the same breath, with equal importance, and do both. Right? And a third thing and a fourth thing. So I think honestly, the biggest challenge for women is 2 things. One, the lack of support.
Right.
And the second, their own innate self-doubt. Their own innate self-doubt makes it so that when they go out to say, oh, I want to do these 2 things. And if somebody, the husband, mother-in-law, anybody says, no, but how will you manage? Rather than saying how they'll manage, they say, yeah, it'll be very difficult. Because the self-doubt is within them. Right? And I think the biggest thing we have to conquer in our lives, like for men, probably they have to conquer other things, but for women, we have to conquer our self-doubt. So honestly, I think it's possible to do it all if you are able to create the support systems. In my case, for example, I don't live with my parents. I don't live with my in-laws. I have 3 young children who need their parents, who need their mother even more. So I've created that support system using my financial resources by creating a staff, which has become like family for me. And I seek help from my in-laws or my parents once in a while when they are able to provide it. My in-laws don't live here, but my mother, who's a full-on independent working woman and a successful doctor. And on the weekends, I take some of her help for some time.
Right.
So I think we have to build our own ecosystems to make ourselves strong, independent, and supported.
And I think there's also this challenge, especially with women, when it comes to finding purpose again and again, especially in their professional lives. Because there is this pattern with us that, we often prioritize our personal lives more than our professional lives. And often you'll find women taking breaks, stepping back from their professional lives. And then there is this, pressure of finding the motivation again.
That's right.
Get into the space and starting everything from scratch all over again. So how do you think one can continue having purpose in their professional space?
See, I mean, I think one of it is not to completely back out of anything. I mean, the fact that there is a maternity leave option today, it gives you the chance for that first 6 months to be with your child. And I'm not saying go back to work all the time. I understand it. I get it, right? But you can try to continue to do consultancy, part-time, work from home. There are options available today
To be in touch with.
to continue to be in the system.
Right.
Because till the time you're in the system, you can, go scale up from 5 to 9 again or 5 to 10 again, or you can scale down from 5 to 2. But if you go to 0 and you're out of the system, to get back in is tough, right? It's tough externally, it's tough internally. I mean, the most cozy place for a woman to be is at home with her children. It's the most comforting space to be. But there is other parts of you which are not nurtured when you're doing that. The intellectual part of you which may not be nurtured. The physical part of you which may not be nurtured. The financial part of you which doesn't have the resources. And I know so many women who gave up their work and said, oh, I want to be the best mother possible, and stayed at home for years.
Has it ever happened with you?
No.
Yeah.
I've never for 1 minute had that doubt in my mind. Just simply because I've grown up with watching my mother work through pregnancy. I mean, obviously not work through pregnancy because I wasn't around, but work through our being young kids. I mean, the whole time, whatever has come, she has continued to maintain her individual self and identity along with being a mother. And I think that's the very critical part of it. If your identity is being a mother alone,
Right.
then I think it becomes very tough for you to
Have that balance.
have that.
And on a completely lighter note, how would you want to get defined apart from the titles that you hold or the public image that you have? You know, how are you like when you're not working?
So, I mean, honestly, at home, obviously with 3 young kids, we're very much the goofy, silly parents. So you'll see us jumping around, dancing to music, running, playing football with my kids, and we're very physical parents. So even though we're older parents, we don't like to just sort of sit around and sort of say, oh, you guys go play alone. We're very physical parents. Every activity I do with them, in terms of every physical activity and otherwise. So that's definitely one. We're also very much um, a couple who's not the most social.
Okay.
We're not out there every night partying. We're, very happy with our core set of people. We like to have intellectual discussions about things that are meaningful, things that are important, things that are priority, but at the same time, like to have a lot of fun in terms of being silly, being with family. We go out sailing sometimes on the weekends. We go trekking, we go hiking in the mountains. So my husband and me both love nature. So we've made like an annual pilgrimage now of going for a trek once a year. So just a variety of things. But, I'm not really into labels, I don't want to box myself into how I want to be remembered. Number one, because I hope I will keep evolving like a butterfly. I don't want to be the same stagnant person for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years at all. But if anything, I hope that the people who are closest to me or not see me as a thinking person, see me as somebody who's made my choices consciously, somebody who's been kind, somebody who's been loving, somebody who's helped people. For me, that's the core. And the rest will keep changing.
A couple of last questions. A cliched one. How do you define success? And do you think your definition of success has evolved over the years with the kind of diverse experiences you've had working in this industry?
It's actually not a cliched question. It's a good question. And actually, you're absolutely right. It's kept evolving. There was a time when I was young, success meant being recognized or being known for doing something. There was a time when success meant, accumulating enough wealth. And frankly, those are both way behind me. I don't see those as measures of for much of success anymore. I feel each of us has to define our own success. And I think, again, that success definition keeps changing on the stage you're in life. So while I'm in the stage today, would I say that my success now is only if I'm a good mother? 100% no. Yes, that's very important to me, but that's not my only definition of success.
There has to be different parts
For
of your
different
life.
parts of you,
Right.
there are different parts of me. So the parameters for success of those different parts of me will be different. So, right? And I think just remembering that for ourselves, that if I'm not healthy, if I'm not fit, am I successful?
Right.
The answer is no. Because I can accumulate all the wealth in my life. But for that physical part of me that needs my body to be this, I'm not successful if I'm not. So I think we have to, at least for me, I've got 3-4 measures of them. One is what I am to my family, not only to my children, but to my parents, to my in-laws, to the rest of my family, to my husband. One, and for my friends, one, who I am in myself, my physical body, my soul, my mind. One is, obviously, am I doing enough impact on society? So I think there's multiple levels.
Very beautifully put. And one advice that you would like to share or give to our viewers, especially the younger lot who are trying to make it in the social impact space, particularly in the purpose economy, people who are trying to build something of their own in the purpose economy space.
I'm honestly very impressed with people who are able to move from the corporate roles into a mindset of saying, look, I care and I want to do work that's meaningful and purposeful. It's not an easy jump to take. It's easier today because you have organizations which are now able and willing to offer you good compensations to do that. But there are few. Majority of the times people make that switch with compromising many things as personal trade-offs. Right. So I find it very impressive anytime people make that choice. And honestly, I think if we work with emotion, if we work with purpose, we are just conscious around the choices we make. I'm 100% sure that each of us can make a huge difference in the country and in the world. I'll give you an example of my husband, who I'm very impressed with the work he does in the foundation sides. Um, in 2016 or 2015, he spent a fair amount of time with the army, etc. And he realized that we were losing a fair number of soldiers every year because our army used to go out in the cold weather. They used to get stuck in avalanches, and some of them would get buried. And unfortunately, at the time, India didn't have its own search and rescue team to save them. And so we would lose a fair number of lives every year. So he created a search and rescue team, whole money, got them trained in Switzerland, got the best gear, started with 6 people in Siachen. And you won't believe it, in the last 10 years, now there are almost 60, 70 people who are on the borders working with the official partner with the army. And the army and this rescue team together are saving lives. And today, in the last 3, 4 years, I think the deaths are 0.
Oh, wow.
Right? So I'm saying just an individual who came up with an idea, had a know-how, was willing to put some money, was able to accomplish this and save hundreds and hundreds of lives with the army,
Right.
of our soldiers who take care of us. And I believe every one of us have the ability to do that.
And I think that's the very core of purpose economy, but to have a purpose in your business. How do you think AI is playing a role, especially in purpose economy and social impact sector?
I think it's still very early days.
Right.
If you ask me, I think AI is playing a role even in the for-profit sector. No, it's just a small way. So I think it will still evolve over time. But having said that, I think the biggest issue in the social sector has been a lack of data. It's very dependent on the public sector for analytics, for interpretations, for data information that can be useful. Now, while the government may have a lot of data, it's not always necessarily in the formats or in the ways that are actually useful. So I think AI can play a very big role there in taking that data and actually structuring it to make it intelligent information that then the social sector can do something smart with. So I think AI will definitely play a very big role there. Obviously, the second thing is, the biggest thing about social sectors, you're going to areas where you have less access. You're going to areas where you have less, not only visibility, but also less talent on the ground. And I think if you're able to use AI smartly for creating talent pools on the ground who are able to do certain things, then you're able to really, do far more impact and make far more progress versus in requiring 100 people to do the same job. Maybe you'll now need 60 because AI will support you in some of the workflows behind the scenes.
I think it can be used very, in a very impactful manner when it comes to giving access to systems in ground.
That's right.
And one more question. Since you also started off really young, how do you see India's young billionaires making an impact in the purpose economy? And we are seeing a lot of young people coming in this industry.
See, it's two schools of thought. I know people who've come through family businesses and family generations where the mindset is still quite traditional,
Right.
which is, I'm here as a stakeholder for my family's wealth. I have to accumulate it, pass it on to my next generation. And they keep growing it and keep passing it on. I'm seeing a different school of thought, which is a little bit the one I'm from, which is that we're lucky to have created any sort of wealth.
Right.
I may give myself a lot of credit, but I'm also very real to say I was also in the right place at the right time. I was lucky. It was not all me. There were so many people behind it. And it's only fair and right that the hoarding of that wealth is not done by me and my family, and that it's shared. It's shared with employees. It's shared with other people on the ground. It's shared with people who are not as privileged in life. And I think therefore a desire to want to share it with those who are not as fortunate. And I think they're both schools of thought. But what I'm really excited to see is a fair number of people. When I say fair, it's still, maybe 50 people in the country, 75 people in the country. But those circles of influence are increasing, where you're seeing every year more and more people come to this thought of saying, what mine is not mine, it's ours. And the country can only become stronger and better. It's not just the government's job to do it. It is also the job of the thinkers, of the ones who have the money to be able to spread it. And I think if you are with that thought, then I think there are a lot of people here to help you. There are organizations today, I'm part of one of them, where we can actually help you design your philanthropy plan. We can actually help you understand where you want to give, what you want to give, and how you get there.
Help in with structure.
Structure. Because the one thing is intent and emotion to say, I want to.
Yeah.
The second question is, where do I start? Right? How do I go? How do I not go to an NGO who's going to cheat me? People have so many thoughts, right?
They have ideas, but they don't know how to execute.
Right. And actually what happens with ideas which don't move to execution is that because we don't know what to do, we then say, "Yeah, chodo, when I get a chance, I'll do it." Then suddenly you'll see a poor child crying on the road and you'll give 100 rupees and your feeling for that minute is settled. Right? Then it'll come up again 1 month later. Again, you'll give 100 rupees and it's settled. But you as an individual have capability to do so much more than that 100 rupees, not just in money, in time, in energy, in thought. So we are seeing people from the corporate sector move. They may not have much money, but they're giving their time and their energy in designing and changing policy for India. We're seeing people who have money, who are giving money and time, right? So I think that to me is really exciting. And frankly, for me, the next, hopefully 40, 50, 60 years of my life will go in not accumulating wealth, but more in distributing it in the places that we need it most.
Well, thank you so much, Ameera, for having this conversation with us. And before we let you go, we want you to sign our book of purpose, and maybe also if you could share a message with us.
Sure, happy to.